Okay, it's official. Okay, so I am Natalia, and I have been practicing herbalism for over 20 years. But I went through the herbalism program at SWIHA, the Western Herbalism Program, and I graduated in 2014. And so I've been a clinical herbalist since then. It was one of the things that we learned about in the program and definitely geek out about in life in general. So I've been kind of going through that process for a while. As some of you know, I work at Desert Sage Herbs currently, so you could come visit me on the days that I work there if you want. Or you can also navigate through my website to see different things that'll be coming up in my life. I have some new offerings that I'll be offering up in the new year that I'm really excited about. As well as follow me on social media, which I think most of you do. So I will at some point as we go down a little bit farther, I'll get on my TikTok soapbox. I do it every time. So I can just kind of heed warning. I actually, if you follow me on social media, I have a whole little debunk TikTok series of stuff that I hear when people come into the store, when clients say things to me. And I'm like, well, I would like to clarify on that one a little bit. So, and herbalism is one of those things. Like this kind of ethical practice of herbalism is really important to me. So I'm going to start a little bit with like the history because it's only an hour class and I digress often. So I'm going to really try to stay on track. I'm really good with time. So I want to kind of get into it. If you do have questions for me, you can put them in the chat or write them down. And then towards the end, we'll answer those questions. That way I can get all my content in and then people can stay and listen to questions if they want, or they can go if they want. So a brief history on herbalism. So this is real brief, but we have been using herbal medicine for thousands of years. There's actually been some even indications of tens of thousands of years through cave drawings and different aspects of things. Egyptians, they were finding as we untomb old tombs that Egyptians have had different kinds of herbs. Honey is another really incredible thing, buried with them. And even like herbs and spices at some point were kind of a currency, right? So they were something where you could trade things with, and they had great value. And that's just as a spice in general. So we started using herbs and spices to doctor up different kinds of foods. Meats that might have been rancid, we started mixing different kinds of herbs with them so they would taste better. But as time has gone on, we've realized that some of those herbs, like sage in particular, actually will help with food poisoning. So it probably helped them digest the food as well and not get sick as much as often with eating questionable food. But a couple modalities that have been around for a long time is traditional Chinese medicine. So that's what that TCM means. And Ayurvedic medicine. So these are some of the oldest models of health that we have reference to because there's lots of documentation about the processes that they have done. And some of those are over 5,000 years old, so pretty old. Another wonderful old, she was a nun or a saint, a musician, an artist, Hildegard of Bingen. She took people in her community to heal. And so she documented a lot of things about herbal medicine. And of course, she didn't have the same kind of knowledge or wording that we have now when it comes to certain ailments like cancer or growths or like, you know, different kinds of lung conditions. Like we've labeled most of those now. But she was still using remedies based off of that. So she would describe what was happening to the person. And then she would use these herbs that she would write down also and describe how she used those herbs for that particular thing. And even without the science backing at that time, if we go forward now and look at what her work was, it's still valued. So she was using herbs for certain ailments that we would still use this day for those certain ailments. So there's a bit of an internal wisdom that happens with plant medicine when we start to reconnect to nature and in that realm. So it's pretty fascinating. There's also been clinical research, so that clinical practice within the TCM, Ayurvedic medicine, a lot of churches, a lot of places where people would go to heal, and they documented. So that's clinical kind of research and practice. And that's over 5,000 years as well for clinical use. Nowadays, we do have a lot of science backing. So basically, there's different kinds of constituents in herbs, right? If I break it down into two simplified categories, it would be like one group of constituents is nourishment. So what feeds the plants, protein, sugars, vitamins, minerals, things like that that help the plants thrive and grow. And then there's other groups of constituents that are more medicinal, right? So if the plant gets sick, it can use these constituents to help remedy things. And based off of where they're at, this is where the constituents alter, right? So like if there's a plant from the Amazonian jungle or in a rainforest, they naturally have constituents in them that are more antifungal because that's what they need, right? So our plants here, they tend to be more astringent, where they can really pull up what they need pretty quick, like because they take advantage of any kind of rain that we possibly get pretty quick. And you'll see, like, if you lived here long enough, the desert can come alive any time of year just based off of some water content. So that's kind of how we break it down, like scientifically, where we're proving what herbs do in the body. So they'll take like a single constituent out, and then they'll see how that affects the body, and then science says, oh, this is what it does. The thing that's really special with herbs is that they're whole plant medicine. So I'm a whole plant medicine person, where the herbs have all kinds of buffers and friends, these mixtures, this alchemical kind of mixtures of constituents that that amplify some of the more medicinal qualities, right? And also keep things safer. My example for that sometimes is like as orange, and like it's oranges and getting vitamin C, so absorbic acid from oranges. So we can take large doses of absorbic acid. We can buy a vitamin C supplement. We can take large doses. But once we reach a certain place in our body, it'll give us diarrhea for one. Or if you have a predisposition for and you've taken it for long periods of time, you can develop kidney stones, especially if you don't have other constituents in the body that is needed to absorb the vitamin C properly. But if you eat an orange, you're getting buffers and all of these different aspects to the orange that help you absorb the absorbic acid and protect the body against some not so great side effects. So that's how plants work as a whole. We have been using, so even like today, and I think I touch on this a little bit as we go down, but even all modern pharmaceuticals were derived by plants at some point, right? So they just can't patent a whole plant. They have to find a single constituent to patent. So that's where they go through their process on that. So that's just a little brief history on herbalism in itself. The next little space I want to kind of talk about is kitchen herbalism versus clinical herbalism. So that was kind of one of my main drives of doing this video, along with some other awkward medicine making videos that I have seen off of TikTok. But clinical herbalism and kitchen herbalism are two kind of totally different things in the realm of connecting with plants versus like education and not education. I mean, I think you should be educated in what you're doing in general, but clinical herbalism needs a little bit more educating. For the kitchen herbalism, or the kitchen witch, as I like to call it, I think every home should have that. Every person, there should be at least one person in your family that knows to make you a nice cup of ginger tea when your stomach is not feeling good, or a cup of chamomile tea when you're feeling anxious or tight or can't sleep, right? That's herbalism, right? But also, herbalism is also using foods in a specific way that feed the body. So fire cider, we all have heard of fire cider before, right? So fire cider is one of those ones where we use garlic and onions and ginger and horseradish, and we throw some peppers in there, and we soak it in vinegar, and then you add a little bit of honey to make this kind of spicy, sweet, pungent solution, this tonic that is very helpful for allergies, for cardiovascular tonifying. It's a circulatory tonic. It could be helpful for colds and flus, especially if everything's like stuck in the head and we really need to move things, right? That's all made from stuff in your kitchen, in your pantry, you know. Chai tea is another one of my really favorite things to talk about within the realms of kitchen medicine. I actually teach a kitchen witching class as well. Um, but the chai is such a strong, beautiful tonic to take on a regular basis. We're technically, I know we live in the desert right now, and we went on a beautiful hike today with a beautiful friend, and it was warm. It doesn't feel like winter out there at all. But when we're in winter, it is the season, and we're meant to kind of go within a little bit and have some reflection. That chai can be really helpful to warm us up, right? It has those beautiful spices in it that creates circulation in the body when we tend to slow down and be a little bit more hibernation, hibernation, hibernating, yeah, hibernating into the into the winter months, you know. So, somebody just, oh, okay. Um, yeah, so we tend to be kind of more sluggish anyways in the winter. So although I drink chai all year long, I will drink it iced in the summertime. So I'm not picky about the weather with chai. But it also has immune boosting properties in it, digestive properties in it, which, if we talk about kitchen herbalism or kitchen witching, it's like really kind of getting down to the basis of our digestive system and nourishing our digestive system. 80% of our immune system's in our digestive system. We have neurotransmitters in our digestive system. So that means we have things that help us feel. Serotonin, dopamine, melatonin, they're all either converted or produced in our gut lining. So our gut health is really important. And that's where we can get down to that really, the nitty gritty of that in the kitchen herbalism. We've all probably had our soup when we're not feeling good. I make a special sicky soup when my kids are sick when they were growing up that had mushrooms and plenty of garlic and onions. And I do bone broths and lots of spices that help to boost their immune system while they were sick and nourish them, you know. So I listed out a couple of different kinds of herbs and spices. So our pantry is full of medicine, is so full of medicine. So be curious about that process and kind of get into that. Other things would be like syrup, steams, bath salts, compresses, and oils. I always tell people don't underestimate gargling salt water when your throat hurts and you're starting to get a sore throat. That's just a simple home remedy. There is a lot of really weird home remedies I see on TikTok. Well, I don't have a TikTok myself, or hear about on TikTok or even Instagram, where I'm like, I don't know about that one, but but there's a lot of really cool things too. So if you ever have any questions about that, just give me a message and I'll let you know. Clinical herbalism, on the other hand, requires a little bit more education. I really do think that if you find an herbalist that you want to sit down and have a clinical session with, that you kind of learn and look into their like credentials a little bit. There isn't any real schooling for it. We don't have to be certified. So anybody can claim it for sure. The biggest issues that that concern me is, pharmaceutical and herb interaction. That's a real thing, So like if you're on those and you're curious about that process, I would look into a clinical herbalist and ask them if they know about pharmaceutical herb interactions. The other thing is there's something called energetics with formulating, like formulating a tonic for somebody is kind of an art, right? We want it really balanced. So if you already have a hot red constitution, and you're really kind of dry and you're always irritated, and I give you a bunch of dry hot herbs, it's going to make you feel worse, right? So knowing that there's this aspect between, cooling off a hot constitution or bringing moisture into a formula when somebody's really dry or vice versa, that's a whole wonderful art. There's another, I love a lady that I love, Rosalie de Floret, and I know I don't say her name right, but she has a lot of free content, and she, I think, has like a poster thing, like a little page that you can download that talks about the energetics of the body and formulation, which is really valuable. And then supporting current symptoms while still looking for a root cause. KP Kolsa is another really fantastic Ayurvedic practitioner that's been an herbalist for a long time. He was part of the American Herbalist Guild actually for a long time as well. He talks about how, you know, like if he has a client in front of him that has acid reflux, out of the kindness of his heart, he might give them something to help with that current symptomatic, but that's not his overall goal. Like, right, as an herbalist, our overall goal is to try to figure out why. What's the whys? Why is the body going into that place? When did it first start going into that place? How can we give the body what it needs to pull itself out of that place? Right. So giving something that helps kind of interact or, you know, take care of the modern day like symptoms in the body is really important to for compliancy, right? Like if somebody is really not feeling good and that root cause takes a little bit longer to heal than if I just give you some slippery elm tea to drink and help with your acid reflux in the current moment, then you'll be a little bit more compliant too to keep going with the protocol itself. So some good things to know about both of those things is that our pantry spices actually they're good for about a year. So we've all probably had some spices maybe in our pantry for like 5 years, 10 years. Like we don't even know. Maybe those were my grandmother's spices. Those are probably, unless they're in a cool old tin and you want to keep the tin, that's I'm down for that. I'm a jar hoarder for sure. But they could be just given back to your plants somehow. You can sprinkle them in your house plants, you can sprinkle them in the garden, you can let them go somewhere else. What happens is they just use their qualities to them, so they're not really effective anymore, right? We have something called organoleptic senses, where you can grab a hold of one of those spices and mush it up in your hands and breathe into it and get it moist with your breath, and then breathe in. And if you can still smell it and it's still really vibrant, and if you taste it and you're like, oh yeah, it tastes like oregano and it's kind of spicy in my mouth, then it might still be good, right? But if it doesn't, then it's not, you don't have very much quality left to it. So some things might, like, cinnamon, some thicker barks could last a little bit longer. But another thing that you might do is if you have your jars that you can refill or anything, sometimes I'll write the date on there, like when I refill it on something that doesn't really go fast in my pantry, just so I remember, oh yeah, that was like 2 years ago. Where'd time go? You can start a medicine garden. There's actually a lot of herbs that will grow here, especially if you look into the kind of Mediterranean type herbs that like the heat. So thyme, sage, basil, oregano, lavender, calendula. If you have a watering system that plants like that, if you don't have space in your backyard, some herbs you can grow on your kitchen counter. Um, so it's just a nice way to connect to the plants. So I do encourage that part. Plus, there's been lots of research that if you have a garden in that soil, that good microbe, full of microbes soil actually has happy bacteria in it. So a gardener that gets in there and you maybe not wash your veggies or stuff off really well at first, just let it kind of sit on there, dust it off and take a bite. Those happy microbes, those microbes can make you happy. They actually release different things in the body, and encourage different kind of growths inside of the gut biome that make us happy. So it's a good thing to be a gardener. I think the only really cranky gardener I ever saw, anybody see Steel Magnolias, which I won't watch anymore because it's so sad. There's oh, I forgot the actress's name. She's a gardener and she's just grouchy. It's just what old ladies do. We just garden. It's like, oh, okay. But most gardeners are happy. When you're looking for a clinical herbalist, it's okay to ask for credentials. It's okay to say, oh, did you go through any schooling with that? How long have you been practicing? And where they learned about their clinical aspect of things. It's okay to ask them what their specialties are, and if you resonate with them. If you don't enjoy them and you don't want to sit with them and you don't want to create, because a protocol, when I create a protocol, it's a co-creation. I want to make sure that you're able to do what I'm suggesting that you do. So it's nice to really feel comfortable enough around them to share. Um, And then, be okay about telling them about specifics. Hey, I'm on this pharmaceutical. Do you know about that? Do you know about interactions? Or I have this going on. Have you ever had any experience with that? So those are some really cool key questions to ask. I wanted to, actually, I'm not sure I have time. Okay. Um, so this is like different aspects. I just added this in different realms of herbalism because herbalism actually is a pretty large scale modality. And uh, in reality, herbalism is just the people's medicine. This is like anybody can learn about this. Like that kitchen aspect of medicine is so important. And I really encourage you to start kind of, looking into some of the spices. These are all really easy medicines that you can take that, have very little interaction at all, especially on, that food source dosing. So they're really safe. Right. So that's a good place to start. The other aspect of clinical herbalism is like there are some herbs that we start to use that we need to be really mindful about how we use them. They're for specific things. There's some herbs that you don't want to take a lot of. There's some herbs that are drop dosing. There's some herbs that can kill you, right? So like, as a whole, like you really want somebody that's educated. And the same with I'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so food is medicine. The basis of herbalism is good eating habits. Like if you don't have those instilled in you already, and you're not starting that, and you're not on the road to that, looking to herbs to help remedy a certain situation or a certain aspect of the body without having food as medicine first isn't really going to help you in the long run, right? Like herbs will do the best that they can at the moment, but if you're out of resources in your body to heal and you're just adding herbs in to keep you going, like stimulating herbs will get people in the shop that are super tired all the time and they want some sort of stimulating herbs like ginseng. And my first question to them is, are you sleeping? Right. And if they're not sleeping, I don't want to give you a stimulating herb because that's not going to help you in the long haul. Another really fantastic herbalist, Jim McDonald, uses the analogy of a bank account, right? When our bank account is already completely deficient, right? We're in the red. Just taking herbs isn't going to bring us back into the positive. It's a lifestyle change that start to bring us back up. Herbs can make us feel better. So then sometimes it's tricky when we give people these adaptogens that make them kind of, oh my gosh, I have this energy. And then they want to go out and do a bunch of stuff, but they're not taking care of all those other things. So their bank account just keeps getting emptier and emptier. And if they stop taking that formula, they realize how tired they really are. So there's a huge contrast. So utilizing food as medicine is a really important part of herbalism. Nature holds the key. Get out in the sun. Plenty of research about what the sun actually does to the body when it sits on the skin, but when it comes into the eyes of the body. Um, all kinds of hormones. Melatonin actually is super regulated from that sensation of the sun hitting the body. So the sun's not really the enemy here. Like, right, everybody gets worried about getting too much sun on their skin and getting skin cancer. The sun isn't actually the enemy in that. It's like our immune system is not working well. We're over toxified. There's other issues going on. But that's a whole other story. Kitchen herbalism. So already talked about that. Family and community herbalist. So then now you got that kitchen herbalist who loves to make soup for everybody who's sick, right? So now that's more of a family and that community herbalist. Or, you got that good friend that brings you a whole thing of beautiful, fresh pressed Arizona citrus when you're not feeling good and some ginger tea, right? So that's part of that kitchen herbalist and that family communities where you're sharing the knowledge with your friends and your family. The clinical herbalist is more of that one-on-one session, a deeper conversation. I do suggest some kind of schooling for people in that role. A gardener is a fun way. It's the most sustainable way of herbalism, right? If we all had like a little garden, a little medicine garden in our yard, it would be a lot more sustainable for the plants out there, as well as travel time and everything else that happens with, buying bulk herbs. So it's a nice way to utilize. Plus, you'll get those happy hormones. United Plant Savers is a really great website to check out for different kinds of bioregional plants that you can start planting, but also things that are endangered that you would want to like be really careful about. Medicine making. So two different categories here. I guess one of them is just that kitchen herbalist making a syrup, making an oil, making a garlic oil for somebody's achy ears, making fire cider, making chai, all that stuff. And then there's a little bit stepped up when you're doing more large quantities and you're selling it. There's something called GMP, good manufacturing practices that we must follow. And I'll talk about that more in a second. The last category I just kind of want to touch on real quick is essential oils. So like I was saying earlier, I'm a whole plant medicine person. So I like plants in their whole form. Essential oils is just one aspect of plants. So the essential oils, the volatile oils of the plants, it can have multiple different constituents in it, but it's just one aspect. And what I like to share with people is like is one drop of peppermint essential oil can be up to like 20 to 30 cups of peppermint tea. We would never get that much of that volatile oil in one sitting. So I don't encourage people to take essential oils internally. You need somebody educated to walk you through it. For one, they can burn tissue. I've seen, people just burn their throat by putting clove or oregano down their throat. You can cause all kinds of ulcers. If you have any kind of underlying lungs, liver, or kidney issues, you will have a hard time metabolizing them and they can cause all kinds of secondary issues. So that's one thing I just like to point out. It's a beautiful aspect of herbalism, but it's a more deeper respect and definitely needs more education before we just start taking them internally. So finding a good herbalist, what does that mean really anyways? There's a lot of wonderful herbalists out there, but it can be really tricky in today's world. So my TikTok soapbox for a moment. So one story I like to tell is that we have a rep that comes into Desert Sage for Herb Farm, and he also reps in California. And so it was at Sprouts. Some lady came in and bought a cayenne tincture, and she called. So this was the employee at Sprouts was sharing this with the rep, and she wound up calling back and talking to this lady who was sharing the story, and was talking about how I don't know what to do. Like this is burning my tissue. I don't know what's wrong. Is there something wrong? What am I supposed to do? Then she's like, well, like what did you do? Well, she saw a TikTok video where they suggested that you take cayenne tincture and you drop it in your eye. And so she dropped them in her eyes. The cayenne tincture. Like if anybody's ever taken cayenne tincture to begin with, you put it on your tongue and you're like, whoa, right? Like we'd say dilute it. And even diluted, you're like, wow, right? Cayenne tincture is amazing, but don't put it in your eyes. That being said, I think the basis of that came from Dr. Christopher, where he talks about cayenne eye washes, which I have done. I have done these cayenne eye washes, but it's a totally different process. You don't put the tincture in your eye. You have to dilute it and you have to make a saline solution. There's like other things that have to happen in place. So I hope that lady instructed her to go to the hospital, because at that point, I'm not sure what happened to her eyes to do that. Like that's pretty intense. My other one is with AI. So AI is really super, super tricky. But there are people creating whole class contents and writing books with AI, right? And so they're not knowledged in herbalism at all. They just put it in for AI to write it, and then they take it and then they teach it. That's hard. That's harder to navigate. It's harder to try to figure out. But for an AI author, one of the things that I usually I've heard that is easy for you guys to start to look at is if you see the author's name, research that author. If the only thing that comes up is that book, then they're probably AI, because they'll make up authors too. They just make people up. And so there was a mushroom book that somebody did, and people went out, harvested mushrooms, and got sick and wound up in the hospital. So the issue is kind of with this, and why I'm passionate about this is that, the FDA has in the past come in, especially in the 60s, they would come into mom pop herbal shops and just close them down, take everything out and walk away. Right. Then there's other herbs that have been out in public, like ephedra was out for a while as a weight loss drug. So there was a supplement companies hopped on board and they were putting it out there, and then people weren't following the directions on it. And ephedra can cause heart palpitations. It can cause a racing heart if you take too much. And so the FDA pulled it off the shelf because of the misuse of that. So really knowing about the herbs is super important, and knowing the content of the provider that's giving you that information, I think is really important. There's a lot of really great herbalists. So the bottom little good to knows, I have a community herbalism page on my website, and it lists a whole bunch of really great herbalists that have, some have books, some are on the interweb, like have podcasts and on Instagram, YouTube, so there's a lot of information you can find out there for free, lots of it. The other thing is that herbal medicine falls under the Supplement Act. So we actually are regulated in a large scale, right? Me as a clinical herbalist, this is my apothecary behind me. And I'd say about 60%, maybe 50% of my herbs are herbs that I make, that I've made myself, and then other ones I've been collecting over a lot of years. And as a clinical herbalist, I can formulate something for you out of my apothecary, and I don't actually need to follow the GPMs, GMPs of the practices. I can, as long as I know what I'm formulating, right? And for you to trust the person who's actually creating the medicine, because you can harvest the wrong medicine and really be in trouble, right? So we actually fall under the Supplement Act. So that's our legalities of things. So if you guys ever see like a tincture, you'll notice on there that there's an expiration date, when in reality tinctures don't expire at all. But we're required to do that because it's under the Supplement Act. And large scale manufacturers are required to go through these GMPs, which is like you have to document everything, you have to code everything, like you have to go through this whole process. It's not really a simplified process. And so I've seen, even at the store, I have a lot of people who come in and they're buying stuff to create these medicines that they want to sell, through their social medias, and more than half of the time they're asking me how to make the medicine. So I'm like, well, if you don't know what you're making, then you might not want to make it and sell it till you figure out how to make it. So it's like a sticky situation. If you see certain dialogue, we're supposed to refrain from certain dialogue. Like we can get in trouble. The FDA actually has, since 2020, come into a lot of our large corporation or larger manufacturers and made them change names on things because they were too allopathic like, right? So they made them change a lot of stuff. But if you hear them talking about cures or treatments, not that I don't believe in beautiful cures and wonderful treatments, but we're not allowed to use that dialogue, right? There was a big, I know this might, I don't know if anybody follows the medical medium like that. I've heard, this is one that I've heard a lot about, where they will bring up, like, say, ginger, and ginger is the cure for cancer. You can't say that. First off, you can't say that. Second off, there's so much more that you need. Like, I do herbal protocols for cancer care. There's not one herb that I would recommend. Like, ginger might be helpful, and it has a lot of great antioxidants, and as a prevention might be really awesome, but that's super misleading. So be careful about that. So if you see things like that, then you'd be like, be careful. It's okay to ask them where they get their research from, like as an herbalist. Like, I would love to share whatever I can with you to help you learn more about herbal medicine. So that's okay to ask as well. And I already talked about that. Okay. Okay. So the rise of ceremonial herbalism. So this is another one that's kind of, dear to my heart. Like, there's a whole process of being ethical in herbalism in general. Me becoming an herbalist myself, it's like I made the intention to be a steward also of the earth. So say I love to wild harvest for myself. I love to do things in nature in general. So say I go out and I find this beautiful patch of herbal medicine. And there's actually not even a patch. Maybe it's like one little plant, maybe two little plants. It would be unethical of me to just take both of those plants. right? So that's where we're kind of in with herbalism. So that United Plant Savers is actually was started to save plants because echinacea and ginseng are way over harvested in the wild, to the point where they're almost extinct. They're almost gone. So that's not good because the community of nature also needs those remedies, right? They grow in communities for reasons, right? So that would be really unethical of me. Um, and so people are doing that, right? Like money is a thing in people's minds, and if they think that they can make money, and these some of these sacred ceremonies, you can charge a lot for these, and people will pay it. But is that ethical? So one is that making sure that if it is somebody, if you are drawn to this, one of my first biggest things to point out is that none of these are magic pills or magic remedies that are going to take away all of your problems. For one, you still have to do your work, right? You still have to learn how to navigate and integrate what's going on in your life. But if you find a practitioner that has no background in what they're doing, where they're getting their medicine, because indigenous people still use these medicines, right? So if we have a whole bunch of people going down into South America and buying up ayahuasca, then what does that leave with the indigenous people? Because some of that is like their livelihood, right? Or peyote, like we can totally over harvest all of these. Psilocybin is the next, like really, like this is a really big one, right? Like a lot of people are doing microdosing and stuff, which I teach the mushroom class and I talk about it in the mushroom class. I think it's great. I think it's awesome. But still, it's not a magic pill, right? Like it's still, there's integration and stuff that need to happen within yourself. But where are you getting them? If you're a mushroom fan and you're out there getting them, where are you getting them from? Because they're still technically illegal here. So you might be buying them from somebody that's buying them from somebody that's not good. Where's your money going, right? So be open to the possibility of receiving the medicines from ethical sources. So people that might be growing them themselves, there's a certain way that you can grow psilocybin where it's prayed over, The other one is cacao ceremonies. So I get this also at Desert Sage. I'll get people calling me, asking me if we have cacao for cacao ceremonies. And I tell them no, that we don't. Because one thing is with cacao, it's like, it's not just regular cacao. Like cacao for cacao ceremonies is processed with blessing and intention, right? So it has prayer around it when it's processed and it's created. And it loses that respect and that value of the elders who maintain that tradition. Tobacco is another one. I actually had somebody not too long ago call in and ask if we had tobacco, and I said no, we don't. We're an herb shop. We don't sell tobacco. We don't have a tobacco license, but you can find it at like a tobacco store. I'm like, oh well, I want to hold a ceremony with tobacco, and I'm looking for sacred tobacco, and I was like, well, that's a process, right? Like that's somebody has to go through the process of blessing it and go through this. And she's like, oh, never mind. I'll just go grab some from the smoke shop and, just, be in that process with it. And I'm like, it's like, why are you doing that? The cacao is another one. I've had several people that just decided that they were going to do cacao ceremonies, but they didn't know where to find cacao. I was like, all right, then you shouldn't be doing it. So there's a lot of really great ethical people out there. That's harder for me to speak on. I can't offer that information to you because some of this stuff is illegal anyways, right? But when you open your heart to it, trust me, it'll come to you. You'll find the right person for you. So I gave you some tips on that. So one is like another one I really want to talk about is an untrained practitioner. I've seen it. I've actually seen it multiple times. But the other one is like somebody who has a lack of helpers to participants in ceremonies. So there was a whole study, or not a study, a whole incident that happened north of Phoenix many years ago, where one guy decided to hold an ayahuasca ceremony and he had like 60, like 58, something like that, people in there. And he had no idea what he was doing. And one of the participants jumped out of a window. So like, like you have to just be mindful about the process. So if they don't have enough helpers, there should be people, if there's more than a certain amount of people, there should be other people there that help support. So incorporating herbs into your daily life. This is a really kind of a wonderful, fun little topic because if you dedicate yourself to eating, eating better, like finding good wholesome foods, then that's it. You start to incorporate herbs into herbalism into your daily life. So a whole food diet is just really eating foods that are closest to their natural state. If you do well on dairy, my example usually is dairy over butter, because our body does know it's a whole myth about saturated fats, right? So our body does know how to articulate saturated fats really well. We've been eating saturated fats as long as we've been hunting. So our body really does know how to articulate it and use it. Hydrogenated fats and partially hydrogenated fats, our body does not know what to do with that. So that's detrimental to our health. So whole foods, there is not one diet that I prescribe for everybody or recommend for everybody, because everybody's so individual. And it depends on what your body's missing. But if I had to say like a blanket statement, I would say that the Mediterranean diet is a really nice one to follow, and you can find lots of research on it. You can find lots of yummy recipes with it. I also like the concept of eating for the seasons. When it's cold outside and it's winter, like eating more stewy things that are broken down because everything's slowing down. In the summers, where I'll eat a lot more smoothies and salads. Um, so incorporating herbs into your daily life through food. The other one is exploring spices and expand your pantry beyond salt and pepper. So I know lots of people who even pepper they don't like; they just like salt. That's kind of, it's kind of sad because there's so many different other flavors that we can add to our food. So if somebody is a picky palate, you can start kind of adding in little bits at a time and see. But at some point, hopefully you get to a place where you're adding in all kinds of spices and different kinds of wonderful things into your food. Other things I like to think about with those are like curries and moles. Some of those can have up to 20 different herbs and spices in just that one aspect. That's beautiful. And as a prevention, that's where herbalism shines, right? We really shine in that whole prevention aspect of things. And when we add in all of those wonderful antioxidants and anti-inflammatories and gut-loving herbs and spices, it really helps us overall. In the least, I'll shout out a lot of times to people: eat your berries, eat your greens. In the least, if you don't like any other fruits or vegetables at the moment, throw those in. Right now is winter, like you can still buy berries, but they're not grown like out they're either like housed in greenhouses. But I do like to eat frozen berries. You can warm them up, make different compotes to put on your pancakes or whatever. But eat those. Greens are the same. There's so many different types of greens that you can eat and get involved with. Another one is fermented foods and fungi. Again, love the mushrooms. All mushrooms help the immune system in some way. They're immune modulating, so they'll help bring balance to the immune system. But then certain mushrooms do other things, like lion's mane, we've probably all heard about, helps with cognitive function, brain function, and nerve function. Maitakes can help balance blood sugar. So they all kind of have this own special aspect. The fermented foods are really important because our gut, the biodiversity in our gut has really declined. And as it's declined, this is where we're seeing a lot more incline of all of these different diseases and disorders. And in our children, we have adult onset disorders like rheumatoid and type 2 diabetes in children, right? So that's like a fundamental issue with food and movement and lifestyle. So that fermented foods, a lot of times it's just a tablespoon. If you like sauerkraut or you do good with dairy, you can get a really good with no added sugar, live ferment yogurt and eat that. Make your own. Fermented foods are really valuable. And then the kitchen herbalist is going to think about soup when you're sick, ginger when you have a stomach ache. Ginger is one of those ones that I always have on hand, because not only is ginger good for nausea and stomach issues, but like on the first onset, kind of how we think of echinacea, like on the first onset of like a cold or a flu, especially like when you're really cold, you start pounding ginger, and more time than not, it'll just wipe it out. So I usually have ginger and elderberry. Like those are my top picks right at the beginning of any sickness. But ginger is also a really incredible anti-inflammatory. So if you have some systemic inflammation, eating ginger on a regular basis can bring it down. Ginger is really good for pain. If you have cramping or menstrual pain, it's really good. You can make a compress with ginger juice and put it on your belly. So ginger is really versatile. It's a nice one to have around. Salt water for when you have sore throats. Um, Let's see. Okay, book learning versus nature time. So the original way of learning about herbalism was to get out in nature. We sat with the plants, we learned about their cycles, we learned about how they tasted, we learned how they felt in our body when we consumed them. That was like that's the traditional way of learning. Book learning is awesome. Like I have, this is only a tiny fraction of my books that I have. I buy herb books everywhere. I love them. But if you're not getting out with the plants and learning from the plants, then you're kind of disconnected from the aspect of herbalism in general. So nowadays we have a lot of people going through school and different kind of classes for herbalism, but it's all pure book learning. They're not getting out into nature. And I say that respectively. I think it's just time to remind people that nature is part of our healing, and that it reflects back to us and it leads us in a way that is more whole in nature, you know. And one of the great ways to do that is to start a garden or have a little plant in your kitchen or in a pot. There's a lot of plants that actually grow in pots. I befriended one of my friends with a vitex. I have a vitex tree in my yard, and she has apples of babies, which leads you to believe what she can do, right? And so I gave her this plant, and it's in a pot, and it's doing great. You know, so some things can do really well in pots. Um, you got to just monitor the watering in the summer here because we are so dry and hot. So create time in nature and start developing a relationship with plants as a whole. And then individually, like maybe you start going and you're like, oh, what is this plant? It catches your eye and you want to sit with it for a moment. And then maybe you wind up IDing it. And then it's like, oh, maybe it is something because you ID'd it, positively ID'd it, and you know that you can actually consume it. So then you might sit with the plant and nibble on one of its little leaves, and you guys hold hands and you sit there and you talk. It's a great thing to do. So I suggest it. Don't ingest any plants unless you know what they are, though, because there are plants that will kill you. Um, and then individual plants. I love this concept about learning about plants one at a time, where we sit down and you might like chamomile is a nice place to start. You can actually grow chamomile here. I've had a friend who did. I've tried and I murdered it all. It's very sad. Um, but you can grow chamomile and then smell it, taste it, drink the tea, get a glycerin of it, get an extract of it, really experience it. And I encourage you to, when you taste it, write about it. How does it taste? Try to figure out a profile on it. And then when you take it and you're sitting there and you're consuming it, how does it make you feel? Right? Because then you're getting to know the plant. It's like, you know, when you're getting to know a good friend, like you just want to sit down and kind of like have this dialogue and figure out not just what you hear about your friend, but get to know that friend, you know? That'll make you a really good herbalist. And that one plant at a time, it seems like, well, but there's all these plants I want to learn. But even if you took a week at a time to learn one plant, then you can learn 4 plants a month. The herbal program that I went through, we learned 150 plants. That was like a real big challenge, but it was awesome. And balance your learning between book learning and actually meeting the plants where they're at, because the plants, not only do they teach us by how when we consume them, but you don't have to consume a plant actually to learn from it, you know. You can look at the surroundings that it has and what other plants are near it. Does it grow in a community? How is it reaching out and communicating with the plants around it? There's this whole underground network of mycelium that plants communicate through. So they're pretty groovy. And here I just kind of gave you, these are some tips on brewing, how you might brew a plant from a bulk herb or even fresh. So some people chamomile is actually one of those ones where some people will be like, oh, I drank chamomile, didn't help. 1 cup of chamomile tea, like from a tea bag, is less than a teaspoon of ground up chamomile. So if I gave you a therapeutic dose of chamomile, have you take maybe 1 to even 4 tablespoons of chamomile per cup. So if you've taken chamomile or you know somebody who has and they're like, no, it didn't work for me, and you still have the tea bags, put 4 or 5 tea bags in there and then see how it makes you feel. So our infusions are when we take those lighter kind of leafy type of herbs, and we brew them. And our minimum brewing time is 20 minutes. So a lot of times when I tell people that, they're like, whoa, what? So uh, that brew time of like 5 to 7 or that 4 to 7, that's for more tisane, like pleasurable tea, good for black teas, green teas, those teas that get really tanniny and really bitter, but not medicinal teas when we're looking for medicinal teas. There's even some mineral rich herbs, and I wrote a little list there, like nettles, alfalfa, dandelion, red raspberry, and oat straw, that you can do an overnight infusion. So you pour the boiled water over them and you let them steep overnight. And it's like a vitamin in a cup. So imagine nettles being a weedy herb in some places, and you can harvest as much of it as you want, and it provides protein and minerals and all of these different things that our body needs to survive, right? I'm a real big look to the weedy plants before we start harvesting rare plants in the middle of the Amazonian forest. I don't think that's necessary. I think we have a lot of weedy plants that are fantastic medicines. So nettles would be one of those. You can grow dandelion here. Red raspberry leaf, raspberries grow up north. You can look at that. I had somebody who's grown oats in their backyard here. You can grow alfalfa here. There's a lot that you can grow here. A decoction, this is where, because I see a lot where people are taking like tougher herbs, like rooty herbs, and they're only just infusing them. You're not getting all of the benefits out of them for one. So then you're wasting parts of the plant, which hurts my feelings. But also, if you purchase that, you want to get the most out of it. And so those denser herbs need what we call a decoction. So this is where we do a gentle simmer on the stove for at least 20-30 minutes, and then you turn it off and you let it steep for the same amount of time. So that one I usually encourage people. You can make large batches of all of these. I make a quart of infusion nearly every day of my life. And so that lasts me all day. It's 4 cups. And because I do it more of like the strong infusion where there's more plants in the jar than you would for a typical infusion, I'll double infuse it. So then I'll pour more hot water over it. I get that question a lot with people too, where they're like, oh, can I rebrew the tea after I use it? You can, but it's going to be a lot less medicinal at that point. I always encourage you you can store it in the fridge up to 3 days. It might get sketchy after 3 days. That's why we're like, you might get rid of it at that point, but always feed it to your plants. It's a mineral rich, right? Just kind of give it back to the earth, discard spent plant material, also back to your compost plants or yard. You can drink most of these hot or cold. It depends on the situation. If you have a fever and I give you herbs that help you sweat, you're going to want to drink them hot, right? So there's some things that you want to drink hot or cold for certain situations. Another really lovely tip I like to do is sometimes I'll brew these teas. I love fresh plant teas. So if I have a friend that happens to bestow me with some wonderful fresh plants, I'll make a really strong infusion and then I'll put it in ice cube trays, and then I'll pop them out as time goes on. So in my fridge, I have little bags of different ice cubes. Ginger is another really good one that I do that with. Like the rhizomes, you could just bring them home or get organic ones, clean them off. I leave the skin on and everything, and I throw them in the blender with a little bit of water until it becomes a slurry. And then I put that through a nut bag or, squeeze it through a cheesecloth. And then I take that ginger juice and I freeze it. And then if I have a stomach ache, I'm getting sick, I'm too cold, whatever ginger's needed for, I pull it out. Food, you could cook with it. So I call that like instant tea. All right. So there's that. I accomplished that. And look at that. 1 minute to spare. I'll eat it. So if you have any questions, I don't know how many are here. Yeah, so either you could, hi Shannon. You could answer, you can ask them here, or you can just ask them in, where would I find this? I asked you to put them in a question or answer Q&As. You guys can just ask the question if you want. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. I am here. So if anybody has to leave, thank you so much for joining me. I do herbal consults, and for your, just a gift for you joining me, if you want to do an herbal consult with me, right now I'm giving you $25 off. Some of you are already my existing clients, but I'll give you $25 off. Oh my God, the code is just for you, all caps. So if you go to register for my consults, then you put in that code and you'll get $25 off. And so I'll send out an email also thanking you for coming, and you'll have my resources on there, but you can schedule through my website. But I thank you so much. And I'll be posting this up on my YouTube and then on my website. If you guys want to watch it again, it'll be there. So if you have to leave, I'll see you later. Thanks for joining. If you have any questions, answer away. I love to talk.
I do have a question because you mentioned something really cool about like being in nature with them and like practically seeing them. Are there like any classes where we can like go out together as like a group and look at herbs and be able to talk about them and possibly work with them or
Yeah. Yeah. So like right now, Janet Desert Sage does a plant walk. She does several plant walks, and I
oh,
think they might be coming up towards the spring. Um, if you're interested in going out and sitting with a plant, just hit me up. I love to do
yeah.
that stuff as well. If I'm going on a hike, if I have enough interest in it, then I'll pull together a whole class of people as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks for asking.
Thanks.
Anything else? Everybody's lingering. It's like we're just having this fun time. I wish I could share tea with you all. Okay. If no other questions? All right, guys. Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, this will be recorded and put up on a different platform, but I'll send you guys all the information out. And I appreciate you taking time on your Monday to spend with me.
Thanks, Natalia. This is awesome.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
thanks, Lori. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.